Thank you, and a lot of good questions. I'll try to address these. Are you trying to come down with one more? Okay.
Yeah.
Last one here. Good. So a couple people asked about impeachment, and there are three current investigations right now. There's a Senate Intelligence Committee investigations, bipartisan House Intelligence Committee investigation, and most importantly, the FBI criminal investigation under the independent counsel. I look forward to those releasing their results. Will there be criminal charges? Did the president illegally collude? All of these types of things that would rise to the level of impeachable offense, we expect that we'll have some good factual basis to act on soon. Again, I don't believe, again, in the Constitution, you can't impeach a president for being a bad president, for wielding their power ineffectively, for saying racist things. You can impeach them for, of course, violating the law, arguments of misdemeanors. So if there was illegal collusion with Russia, again, was it him? Was it people around him? What did he know? Did he direct it? I'm confident that the process will get to the bottom of the matter on those, and that there'll be an accounting for it, and then the appropriate legislative reaction if in fact those laws were violated, whether it's impeachment of the president or others around him who were implicated, would be an appropriate way to proceed. You also mentioned emoluments. That's in the courts, so there have been lawsuits filed over the emoluments clause, whether it was violated or not. It's certainly possible that if there were violations, those could be wrapped up in other charges as well. But again, sometimes things don't move as fast as we like. And there is an FBI investigation. Whether you love President Trump, whether you dislike President Trump, we all need to make sure that there's a benefit of a doubt there. Even if you are sure he never did a thing wrong, or you think for sure he's a hardened criminal, let's let the process, go through this. And it's not going to take forever. I don't know whether it's, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. I mean, they'll wrap up that investigation and they'll provide an accounting. The one piece that's missing, which I continue to champion, is a bipartisan commission about the foreign interference in the last election, which we had for 9/11 as an example. I sponsored the bill to do that. And the reason that that's so important is it is not just an accounting of the past, it's recommendations to prevent foreign interference in our elections going forward. None of the other investigations are charged with that at all. They're backward looking. We need to have a bipartisan commission to remove this from politics. This has nothing to do with politics, Democrat, Republican, and just say here are the safeguards we need to put in place to protect the integrity of our democracy. Because certainly from the evidence that we do know, yes, the Russians interfered to defeat Hillary Clinton, but they also interfered to undermine the trust Americans have in their own democracy and democratic process. And that was very much one of their goals, perhaps even a greater goal than who they elected. And we need to make sure we have the safeguards in place to prevent that from happening again. Tax reform, I think certainly one principle I would have is I would not support a tax system that as a whole was more regressive than our current tax system. So if it was a tax system that put more of a burden on the middle class, removed the tax burden from the wealthy, I would not be interested in supporting that. It's certainly more complicated than that, because when you're talking about tax reform, you're talking about getting rid of loopholes and deductions and bringing down rates. And different people use deductions in different ways. The big three for deductions, and this is why tax reform is so hard, the big three are charitable contributions, state and local tax deductibility, and home mortgage interest deductibility. Those are all very, very popular. And so you're not going to be able to substantially reduce rates unless you do something limiting one of those three. Now, Paul Ryan had a different idea. He introduced what the concept of a border adjustment tax, a 20% tariff on all incoming products, very regressive. That is like a sales tax. That means your clothing, everything at Walmart, everything middle class, working families buy, 20% increase, and then using that to bring down the income tax rate on the wealthy. So that is an example of, as are sales taxes in general, but particularly, a sales tax on imported items is more regressive than a sales tax across the board anyway. There are also items that are neutral with regard to regressivity or progressivity, like a broad-based value-added tax or VAT is generally seen by economists as not regressive or progressive. So if you wanted to do something like that to lead to rate reductions, it might be something that we could talk about. So I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. It's a hard, even though it sounds simple, reduce loopholes, bring down rates, when you're fighting over which loophole and which rates, it gets very, very hard. It's certainly a passion of Paul Ryan's. I don't know if President Trump, what he really feels about it. The problem with his proposal was it would have increased the deficit substantially. It wasn't like a real proposal. It was just tax cuts without paying for them. The next gentleman talked about unaffiliated and the shutdown and how we can make progress in a divided country. It starts with, starts locally, it starts with member for member. I mean, there are, many people don't understand that in Congress, most Republicans and Democrats get along just fine. There's not a problem with getting along. You probably have neighbors of a different party that you get along fine with. You go to their parties, they go to yours. It's not so much that. It's more that there is a broad ideological gap in our country. And it's not so much the members of Congress. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, but generally if you took a person off the street from rural Alabama or from San Francisco, they would have very different values. They would have very different values, or in northern Colorado, right? So it's a very diverse country ideologically. There are 0 unaffiliated members of Congress. Now, Colorado made a very positive reform. Colorado voters approved Proposition 108, which allows unaffiliated voters to vote in primaries now. So every unaffiliated voter in the state will actually they get both. They get a Democratic and Republican ballot, and hopefully clear instructions, because they're not allowed to return vote. They actually have to pick one, which is fine, based on the candidate, based on the race. We have a plurality of unaffiliated voters in our state, a plurality of unaffiliated voters in my district. And they never, up until the very next election, they never had a say in the nominating process. And they only frequently felt they had a choice of the lesser of two evils. So unaffiliated voters will now be able to participate in the nominating process of either party. Now, it's also good, and I agree with this, Republicans can't vote in Democratic primaries, Democrats vote in Republican primaries, because there you get into the gamesmanship and trying to mess each other up. But the unaffiliated voters can participate now, and it is hard for an unaffiliated candidate to win. And that's because, as you know, just because unaffiliated voters are not a ideologically cohesive group either. You have people that are unaffiliated because they say, those Republicans, they're too liberal, they sold out, I'm way more conservative. And you have people who say, those Democrats, they're far too moderate, I'm far more progressive, I'm never going to join them. And so you have that among the unaffiliated as well. And it's good that those people can participate also in the nominating process. But it is hard for an unaffiliated candidate, not possible to win, simply because in a district like this, in a state like this, if you're a Democrat, you start out with a good third of the vote. If you're a Republican, you start out with a good third of the vote. If you're unaffiliated, you don't start out with that third of the vote. You got to win every vote. Not that you can't do it, but because the unaffiliated are not a party and they're all over the place ideologically, it's just a lot harder to actually get a winner across the finish line in a winner-take-all election system. Guantanamo, I will be committed through the amendment process. I've always supported closing down the illegal detention facility in Guantanamo. If there's people that need to be brought up and bring criminal charges, let's bring them here and do that. But it's completely inappropriate that we have this facility that exists outside our laws and our norms in violation of habeas corpus. Tax reform, I kind of addressed, will it work? It's hard, and again, the litmus test, is it more regressive? Is it progressive? What does it look like? Simplification is good. If there's a way to get it done, that would be terrific. On deficit and debt, the last time the country had a balanced budget was in the mid-1990s. The deficit is likely headed the wrong direction with the significant increases in defense spending from President Trump, particularly if they couple that with any tax cuts. It's very likely to increase. Democrats might be a little better, but they're not that much better. I think what Republicans tend to do is they like to cut taxes and then they increase military spending, and they never have the real guts to make the hard cuts on the non-military side. Thank goodness, because it's important in education and healthcare. They usually threaten them and then they walk away. So they wind up increasing spending, decreasing. Democrats, usually they're happy to do some cuts on the military side. They want to increase the non-military side, and they're also good about not doing tax cuts that aren't paid for. So they're a little better. But the truth is that neither party is very good, and that's why I supported a balanced budget amendment that would require Congress to balance the budget. We have it in Colorado. Colorado has a balanced budget year after year. I don't think neither party has my confidence that they'll actually do it unless they're required to. So there are voices of fiscal responsibility on both sides, and there are also fiscally reckless voices on both sides. I don't see that as a partisan issue. Unfortunately, the bigger the deficit and debt, I argue it's bad for Democrats and Republicans. It doesn't matter your ideology, independents too. I mean, it just is bad because if you're a conservative and you hate taxes, if you keep having debt, in the future, you'll have to have tax increases. If you're a liberal and you love all the government programs, those will have to be cut in the future when the government's running out of money, just because interest is taking up a bigger and bigger percentage of the expenditures every year. So it doesn't matter your ideology. It is, not bad to have a deficit in 1 year. And by the way, our constitutional amendment has a carve out in a national emergency. We can certainly have a deficit in that year. But on an ongoing basis, you have to be pretty close to being in balance, and Congress has not done that. The next process of democratic messaging, how to include democratic position. I think part of the challenge is that both parties are very broad tenets, it's not like there's ideological cohesion or messaging on the Republican side either, right? I mean, you hear them and even the president attacking members of his own party, intensely disagreeing with them. The Democratic side is a broad tent. There's conservative Democrats like Joe Manchin of West Virginia. There's very liberal Democrats like some from Los Angeles or San Francisco and everybody in between. And it's hard to agree on everything. But I think in general, Democrats believe that we should have a more sustainable way of life, a fairer way of life, a more community-oriented way of life. But on actual policies, there's going to be large ideological and geographic differences. So it's not like there's any one response. I think I think you mentioned you were at the meeting in Loveland, where I kind of charge people, and I do this again, to be ambassadors of truth. And that doesn't mean liberal truth or conservative truth. It means objective truth, with quality journalism. And I guess there's fake left-wing news too, just like there's fake right-wing news. Sometimes I get fake left-wing stuff from my mom. Obviously I won't get fake right-wing stuff from her, I get fake left-wing stuff from her. But it's important, there's also a discipline of independent, responsible journalism. There's journalists who adhere to just the facts and objectivity, a very high professional standard, and we should make sure that we refute inaccurate information on all sides and share on our own networks, whether that's social media, whether that's your poker or knitting group, whatever it is, not in a confrontational way, but in an objective way, real information. Not my quote, but it's a good one, I can't remember who to attribute it to, that everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts. Infrastructure is going to be challenging as we talked about, to see how that might get through the Congress. It's very needed here in northern Colorado to get ahead of the curve. Somebody also asked about the one-year budget. There's a number of problems with one-year budgeting. I'm actually have been supportive of an effort to move to a two-year budget in Congress. It's a bipartisan bill. The person who started it was Republican, but he's got a small group of us now. There's a problem with kind of a perverse incentive at federal expenditures. Agencies have to spend all the money they have at the end of the year because they can't carry it over the next year. And so they're likely to suboptimally spend it rather than have a more thoughtful process around it. And so capital investments that need to be made often aren't made. Things are rushed out the door at the end of the fiscal year just because they lose the money if they don't spend it. So a multi-year budget would be better. We're talking 2 years. I think you said maybe 3 or 5. I hadn't really thought about that, but even 2 years would be a big improvement if we moved to. It would provide more certainty in planning and more efficiency. Let's see, the public sector loan forgiveness program is very much being attacked by some. That'll be part of the fight. A couple people brought up individual programs here that expire September 30th and are under attack. There's a lot of those, and part of the problem with, again, the workflow, the way they do things in Congress is that this is likely to be a last-minute bill that people see a day or two before it passes, and what we'll be doing is staying awake all night and trying to figure out, does it have this in it? Does it have this in it? That's what we'll be doing, and trying to figure out what I get, which is a yes or no vote, assuming it's closed for amendments, which is what I expect it would be. Trying to figure out which of these priorities are in it and which of these are not. By the way, wrong way to govern, bad way to govern, bad for the system, bad for small d democratic accountability, because how are voters supposed to hold their elected officials accountable when you have to vote for everything in one bill, and whether you vote for it or against it, you're for a bunch of things you're actually against, you're against a bunch of things you're for, because what you do is there's like these 50 things I like, and these things I don't like, you weigh it, and I have to do my vote based on, well, it's a little better than not doing it, but at the same time I'm voting for a bunch of things I dislike. A better process would be what we have in the Colorado legislature called the single subject law. Bills come up related to single subject. The prime intention is actually to introduce the bill with the most conservative congressman from Colorado, Doug Lamborn from Colorado Springs. I don't have a lot in common, but we co-sponsored a bill that I authored to apply single subject law to United States Congress. Needless to say, it didn't go anywhere because Republican and Democratic leadership both opposed it. But maybe we'll do that again. I mean, we sort of gave up that. Thanks for talking about. Police relations was the next question. We have a big problem, again, in the rhetoric being used. I'm a supporter of additional support for cameras. We have a potential breakdown of relationships between the immigrant community and law enforcement in some jurisdictions. I think Fort Collins Police has done a good job of reaching out to the immigrant community. We want to make sure that regardless of people's documentation status, they're partners in keeping our community safe in law enforcement. So it's a lot of it is local control. Certainly the federal side can contribute to those relationships, but there's no excuse for the necessary hard work of sheriffs and police chiefs and their deputies in building those community ties that allow them to have community-based policing and keep communities safe. So certainly I'm supportive of federal efforts to support that, but where the rubber meets the road is locally on law enforcement issues. And finally, the emoluments clause, as you said, that's in the courts now. I don't know if there's one or more than one court case about that. I know there's at least one, there might be 2 or 3. And again, things are sometimes slower than we might like, but the justice system is usually pretty good about getting to the bottom of the facts, which we don't have a lot of the facts. I mean, we know generally that we think Trump or his associates own certain hotels and certain people stay there, but what the courts will do is they'll actually have access through discovery of all the real information. I mean, it's a little bit unclear what he actually owns and who's staying there, and so that'll be appropriate for them to have that level of transparency in the courts and then have the decision. So we're on Facebook, Congressman Jared Polis, Twitter, Rep. Jared Polis. You're welcome to call us, stop by our office in Fort Collins, visit us, keep your ideas flowing, and thank you for this great civic engagement. This is more people than we've ever had here in Fort Collins, so in Wellington. Thank you for your participation.